Good morning from a warm day in Chicago. Thank you, Suranya, for inviting me to speak at this event, at this very important event in the study of children's care worldwide. My lecture, my brief presentation relates not just to children growing up in India, but to children growing up everywhere in the world. I want to start by saying that diversity and difference is not only a fact of natural existence of all life forms, whether you're talking about plants or animals or human animals, but it is also essential for survival. If all of us were exactly the same, we would have perished by now. Coming to human societies, every culture has a right to its cultural practices, and I include childcare practices in that, and how we bring up our children for any given society is an emotional and even a moral issue for people. People invest intensely towards specific developmental goals because these developmental goals are valued to that society. For example, if you take Indian society, there is a great deal of value for relationships, particularly kin relationships. And these family relationships are so important that even those people who we are not related to become encompassed in that kin terminology to express closeness with other people, like women of the age of the mother are addressed by the kin term Masi, which literally means mother's sister. All elderly people can be addressed by the name of grandmother, grandfather, paternal grandfather, and so on. So in Indian society, relationships are very highly valued. In other cultures, there are other issues that are valued. It's not that relationships are not valued in any culture, because relationships are essential for the survival of the young child. But the fact that there may be other priorities in bringing up children, let's take the example of modern Western society, where a child's autonomy, independence, identity as a separate individual is a matter of great concern, and a lot of the childcare practices are targeted towards making the child more autonomous, more independent, more expressive of himself or herself. And knowing what you would like is a very important aspect of these social groups. However, when we look back at our history, colonization provided us with the idea that the West is the best. We were told that we must strive for the way of life of the West, but we were also clearly told that we are never likely to become like that. So the aspiration was necessary, but the goal was never accepted that you would become like the colonizer. You were always treated as someone who should want to become like us, but will never achieve that status. However, colonialism is long gone, but as we have studied in sociology, social anthropology, and cultural studies, and even in political science, post-colonial studies have demonstrated how this trap of wanting to be like someone else, wanting to be like people who are wealthier, richer, is something that still persists very strongly. Although the trends of brain drain and others may have gone down, there is still a desire for people to move to more progressive countries. We can see that by immigration studies, although I'm very happy to report that some reverse trends are also happening. However, what does this desire to be like someone else that is imposed on others, what does it do to cultural practices? In the past, practices related to food or dress or language were vilified. It was seen as something that was inferior. Immigrants always landed up with having being placed at a somewhat inferior status. For example, studies on children's developmental outcomes is seen as, or what is called performance in child development, were always lower. They performed lower than children from wealthier societies. However, there is an important fact in developmental psychology, which is now been exposed by scholars like Henrik and his colleagues, that outcomes of studies in developmental psychology and child development do not even represent, or actually they go on to say that even psychology in general does not represent the diversity that is present even in the West. And he locates that, he uses the acronym WEIRD samples to specify that most of the studies in psychology are done on Western, industrialized, rich societies, and the outcomes of those studies, the findings of those studies, are applied globally. So this is a huge issue in my discipline that I have worked with all my life. So what happens as an outcome when studies are done on a very small group of people and they are imposed globally, the cultural differences that are an issue of diversity become a way of imposing what are seen as gold standards of development. So this is the best outcome. You need to strive for that outcome, but because the ways in which you bring up children is different, you will never really achieve those standards because children are brought up differently. This promotion of the best way to live, that is proliferating through child protection services, through, these are direct intervention programs into families in different parts of the world, particularly the global south, because we are seen as, having large numbers of poor people. These are promoted as, this is the myth of promoting the best way to live, the best way to bring up your children. These gold standards of childcare are based on the developmental psychological research that is based on a very limited sample, as I said. So when such practices become promoted by intervention programs, by child protection services, they become promoted as the best. It also becomes labeled as the only way to bring up children. So my argument is simply this: when childcare practices are delicately adapted to the cultures in which we live, how can external practices be imposed as better than or best? When a society values bringing up its children in a particular way, let us take the example of sleeping patterns. Who sleeps by whom? In cultures that do not have the luxury of having a separate bedroom, having guards to make sure that the child is asleep, who do not have the resources to create an environment in which the child is safe and warm, to promote that the child sleeps separately from an adult is, in my opinion, unethical. Because if the environment is not safe, isn't it best for the child to sleep with the mother? So when we look at difference, that difference become imposed as deficient in some way, and that's my main objection. Apart from the fact that these childcare practices are promoted as being the best by the West, this additional clause of seeing any other way of bringing up children as not just different, not just inferior, but as often as abusive. For example, the very affectionate way of feeding children at a young age that is you see very much in Sri Lankan, Indian and other South Asian families. Apart from the fact that it is also seen to promote affection, there is a very clear desire not to see food wasted. These are cultures where food security has not long ago been an issue for many families, and I think it is justifiable to argue that the kind of wastage that there is in other parts of the world is difficult for us to accept. So let us look more carefully at child protection services, at international agencies and family intervention programs worldwide that are being promoted by international aid agencies, and review some of the ways in which they are promoting very specific childcare practices. This is unjustifiable both on scientific as well as ethical grounds. Thank you.